Actually, I was 7 years old. That would have been 1976 when I started martial arts training, and I started in a martial art called Shorin-ryu karate, and it was being offered at my elementary school. And it was very difficult for me to get in because at that time there weren't a lot of karate schools or programs made available, and at that time it was a very popular class, and so the first semester that I tried to get in, it was full, and I was put on a waiting list for the next semester. And I waited a little bit too late the second semester and did the same thing, and was told that I was a little bit late. And so, luckily for me, at the very last moment, one of the other kids got a little nervous and dropped out of the program, which opened it up for me, and so I got in. And when I got into the program, it was being taught by an African-American lady, and one of her top students was my best friend at that time, and I didn't have any idea that he was training in martial arts, and so it was a kind of an eye-opener for me. And he was already a brown belt in her program, but had never said anything to me or indicated, never tried to use it on me or play with it or anything like that. And so the first day when we were in the class, the instructor asked for a volunteer, and of course I volunteered, and she pulled me out along with my friend Dennis and had us do an impromptu sparring match. And so I was pretty confident, because we were good friends, that things were going to be okay and we were just going to play a little bit. And very quickly I learned that this was not to be played with. My friend repeatedly roundhouse kicked my thigh, probably 7 or 8 times, until I finally cried and quit. And at that moment I was hooked. I just knew that there was a lot of power in the martial arts, and thinking back on that, if something like that were to take place today, those would be grounds for lawsuits. So I don't know, things were quite different back in those days, and I was very fortunate actually to be brought up in those days, because the training was very rigorous, and the instructors didn't really have to worry about outside parents interfering or people turning you into the Child Protection Services because of the training methods and things like that. And so I was fortunate to get some of that old school training. But I remember going back home that very day and being so excited, because I was telling my mother I had found my calling in life and that's what I was going to do for a career. And she basically laughed at me and told me that I was dreaming, and to get a real job. And 30-some years later, I'm still doing it, and she's very proud of me now. So that's how I got my start. Well, as I mentioned, I got my start through this program, but the reason that I was so interested in the martial arts is because I was very small for my age, but I never backed down from a challenge or from bullies. And so I got picked on a lot and usually retaliated with my mouth, and that got me into more trouble. And so I needed to find some way to protect myself. I remember very vividly back in that year, 1976, I was going to school 113 on the east side, and I was walking home with my brother after school, and we got stopped on the bridge right past outside the school, and as I was crossing the bridge, two boys, one of them my size, one of them much bigger than me, I'm assuming that they were brothers or good friends, grabbed me and forcibly took my watch off of my wrist, and there was nothing I could do about it. And my brother was just completely scared as well and didn't know what to do either, and they took my watch from me, and there was nothing I could do about it. And then they took my watch and threw it over the bridge and into the water, and I watched it float down the stream. And it was one of those, at that time, it was one of those digital watches that I don't know that they make them anymore, but they were, I guess, expensive for a child to have. And it was a kind of a neat thing that I had. It was one of the ones you could press it and it would light up, and the screen was green, and I was very proud of the watch. And when they did that to me, it was a terrible thing that happened to me, and I didn't have any way to deal with it. So I had seen the Chuck Norris movies and was very interested in learning to do what I saw him do. And when this program came to my school as an after-school program, that's how I got started, and it was the absolute best decision I ever made. What arts have I trained in? Well, as I mentioned, the first art that I trained in was Shorin Ryu with this teacher. And I still don't remember her name. I wish I could find out. In fact, I've tried to investigate and find out who she is or who she was so that I could thank her, but I've been unsuccessful, and I imagine she's pretty old by now if she's even still alive. But from there I went to the art of Shorei Goju-ryu and Judo together. My instructor at that time taught both of those arts at the school, and so I was training in both of those arts for a short period of time. My mother had worked in a restaurant, and the instructor happened to work at the restaurant with her and taught martial arts at this school over on the west side of Indianapolis, and so I got to get my first taste of an actual real school at that time, and those two arts were my next arts. And I didn't last long there because my mother kind of refused to pay for classes after a short period of time, stating that they were too expensive. And back in those days, I think we were paying about $35 or $36 a month, and back in that was a long time ago. But back then, that was expensive, and so that was pretty much the going rate for many martial arts schools. And so I was told that if I wanted to continue my martial arts training, I would have to pay for it myself. She would sign for me but not pay for me. And so after I did that, and I believe I moved a lot back then, and so I moved from that area, and that school was no longer available to me. And so I decided I wanted to do martial arts, and I saw this. I was walking to, I remember, it was with my brother again, to Children's Palace over on the west side, which was a children's toy store. And I got up to the shopping plaza, which was Honey Creek Plaza, which is over on 38th and Moeller Road area. And I saw this Asian man who looked very much like Jackie Chan, and he was wearing a peach-colored Kung Fu uniform, and he was out in front of his martial arts school practicing the long staff, twirling and spinning it and tossing it up in the air and practicing some of these movements and things. And I was just enamored by this, and I thought, oh my God, I have got to go talk to this man. And so I went in and discussed things with him, and I probably spent an hour just looking around in the school and looking through the manuals or the books that he had and pictures of himself performing and things of this nature. And he had just opened the school about a month or so before I had seen him. And I ran home to my parents and told them about it, and they told me that again I had to pay for it myself, but they'd be willing to sign the contract for me. So I ran out and got not one but 4 paper routes. I got two star routes in the early morning, and 2 news routes in the evening through the Indianapolis Star and the Indianapolis News newspapers. And I started carrying newspapers to pay for my martial arts lessons. I couldn't even afford through my newspaper carrying the $36 a month, so I would bring in to my instructor all of these rolls of quarters and dimes and nickels and things that I would use from collecting in my newspaper routes. Back in those days, kids could have newspaper routes, and I don't believe they can have them anymore. But that's how I got started there. And in those arts, I trained in the arts of Taekwondo, Kung Fu, and Hapkido simultaneously with my instructor, Grandmaster Young Pyo Che. And that was in 1983 that I started with him, and I was very fortunate to be one of his first students and one of his longest students. And so from there, I dabbled in other arts. Of course, I met people at tournaments, and I met people in different places, and I picked up books and magazines and articles, and met many different people. And so I trained in kickboxing, I trained in Tang Sudo, let's see, I did some training in Kenpo Karate, and that was a very exciting time for me as well. I learned a lot of things, and those are my primary arts. I've had some training in little bits and pieces in many different arts though. Tai Chi also was another main art that I trained in and have trained in for the duration of my training, so I guess I've done quite a few things. I also trained in boxing, did a little wrestling also in high school, and those are the primary ones. Now, of course, I've done seminars in different arts. I've trained, one of the Kung Fu systems that I've trained in is called Wushu, which is more of a modern style of martial arts training and Kung Fu with gymnastics combined and ballet combined into it to create a performing art. I've never been much of a gymnastic type person, so I was very limited in how high I could go with the athleticism of that art, but it's a wonderful art as well, and a lot of our weapons come through that particular art. Well, my biggest inspiration in martial arts, that's twofold. The first, obviously, for me is Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was the person that when I first saw his movie Enter the Dragon, it was created in 1973, and I didn't see it until 1983, but I kept reading about it in magazines, and people kept talking about it. But back in those days, if it wasn't playing at the movie, it wasn't available. It wasn't like today's technology where you could download it from a website or rent it on a DVD or purchase it or something like that. You had to actually go to the movie theaters. And then eventually they came out with something called Sony Betamax. Maybe you remember that. And the standard that stuck, which was the VHS videotape. And they had another type of video player called a video disc, and it was about the size of an old LP, which, again, dating myself a little bit, but these video discs. My stepfather had purchased one, and they were the cleanest thing you could get. They were kind of like today's version of a DVD, and they were huge discs, but they were enclosed in this big plastic thing, and so you put it in the player and then you would pull it out, and many of the movies came in two parts. And so this particular movie, I finally found it at one of the video stores, and it was Enter the Dragon, and it came in two different video discs, and laser discs is what they were called. And I put it in there, and then about halfway through it would tell you to insert the second disc. And when I saw that movie, I was a total Bruce Lee fan. I created all kinds of posters, and every magazine that had Bruce Lee on it I cut out and put it onto my windows and my walls. And I remember taking some of the drawings or the pictures and drawing them in fluorescent crayon, and then putting it on the walls, and made all of the pictures fluorescent so that when I turned the black light on in my room, it would all glow, and it was like a shrine to Bruce Lee, and I was so enthralled with Bruce Lee, and so he's been my biggest influence. But I began studying his philosophy, and to this day, his philosophy holds up, and he's still the martial arts, the martial artist of the 20th century that's been the most influential, and specifically to me. I love his movies, even though he only made 4.5 movies. So he was my biggest inspiration, and still is my biggest inspiration. Any literature that's out there, I have it, and I've been a Bruce Lee historian, and I just can't get enough of the man. I also, my other influence in the martial arts is my wife. She was first my student, and she was basically the female version of me, if you will. I had never had a student, and I don't mean to be dismissive to any of my other students, especially my longtime students, but nobody has ever been as passionate about the martial arts and as closely linked to my own passion as my wife. And so I believe that's the biggest thing that attracted me to her, and that's the reason we're married. And so my wife is definitely that person for me. Achieving my black belt, wow. You know, the majority of schools in the United States, and really the world these days, is an average of 3 to 4 years. In some places you can get them in 2 years at some schools. It took me 9 years, and I'll explain why. 9 years to receive my black belt, and it was a very difficult process for me. As I mentioned, I paid for my lessons myself, and I did a lot of moving around. My parents got divorced when I was, I believe I was 5 years old, and or 5 or 6, and so I did a lot of moving back and forth between my mother and my father. And my father, when the divorce happened, not long after that, he moved back to his hometown of Rochester, Minnesota. And so every so often I would miss him, and I would go live with my father. And so when I started my training with Grandmaster Che here in Indianapolis, in 19-something, I moved back to my father, and so that I had to start all over at a martial arts school up there that had a completely different curriculum, and then I would move back to Indianapolis and continue training with Grandmaster Che, and that happened 2 or 3 times. So I had to go back and forth and learn and adapt at both schools. Eventually, back in 1987, I went into the military, and went to the military and to the Army, and to find my true calling in life, and I ended up teaching martial arts in the military. And so that's how I knew that it was going to be my thing. And when I came back from the military, I finished my training and earned my black belt in 1992. So actually it was a little bit longer than I had thought. But when I earned my black belt, it was basically the biggest accomplishment of my life. But there were a lot of opportunities for me to quit, and I was also dealing with severe asthma. So at that time I had one of the inhalers. I was on something called Provenolin, which was a little inhaler, and you took it, supposed to take it no more than 4 times a day, and it was any time a sign of sign of an asthma attack would come on. And so obviously doing the martial arts was very difficult and challenging for me, because about 3 kicks into doing front snap kicks I would have an asthma attack, and so I had to carry this Provenolin in my belt and take it in order to get through the class. And so I would get about 3 kicks done and then rest for the rest of the kicks on both sides, and then we would move on to the roundhouse kicks, and it would be the same thing, and I'd be puffing again, and then I'd get about 3 kicks in, and then the side kicks, and same thing. And so I was taking the inhaler probably 4 times in an hour, and probably wasn't a great thing to do, but luckily I didn't die from it. So through the martial arts, though, I was able to get rid of my asthma and bring it under control through the breathing exercises that we do in our classes. And that was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And then in competition, I'd be in the middle of a sparring match and have an asthma attack and have to finish the sparring match just to keep from getting killed. So that was very difficult for me. And so getting to black belt was not an easy thing for me, but it was very, very rewarding. And I took much longer than most people to do, but I think that was probably the reason that I'm still around today, because it was very challenging for me. It was something that I had to continue to pursue in order to receive and get, and I did. But when I finally got it, I realized that I had so much more work to do. Yes, I failed several tests, and not just failed tests, but I was told on several occasions that I had to wait because I wasn't ready to take the test. And at the time, I didn't understand that. My grandmaster told me, "You're not ready, and you need to practice some more," and I felt that I was ready. And I was very cocky at that time, and thought that I deserved it and I should get it because I'd been coming to class. But looking back on that, those times were the best. That was the best things that ever happened to me, was failing my tests, because they taught me all about self-discipline. They really made me look inward at myself and realize that I could have done a lot more and a lot better in classes than I had. And when that happened to me, and I was told that I had to wait, or when I failed a test, it basically inspired something in me to really want to get serious and work hard. And at that point, I would really apply myself. It made a huge difference in my abilities. So I also, when I left my Grandmaster's organization, I got involved in 3 different schools. I got involved in a Taekwondo school, I got involved in a Hapkido school, and I got involved, actually it was 4 schools. I got involved in a Kondo, which is a Kendo school, and then I got involved in a Hapkido school. And I used to fly out well, first I drove to Chicago, and that didn't last too long. Because I did every Wednesday would drive to Chicago and train, and then have to stay overnight and then come back, and I would take every class they had in the afternoon. And that got to the point where I couldn't do that anymore, and I was already flying out to California to train with my grandmaster in Kung Fu out there, because that was the only place that I could find that taught the art that my Grandmaster Che taught, that was similar enough to it that I could do. So I flew out to California. And while I was out there, I was driving in the Los Angeles area. I was driving out towards Santa Monica, and I happened to notice Grandmaster Bong Su-han's school. And maybe you're familiar if you're old enough. Grandmaster Bong Su-han was the person who did the Billy Jack movies. He was the actual guy that did all the techniques for the actor Tom Laughlin. And then they did 2 and 3 and 4 different Billy Jack movies, and in those movies he became one of the co-stars with Tom Laughlin. And he also did a movie called Kentucky Fried Movie, which was a spoof on Enter the Dragon. And I had seen him on magazine covers, and he had a book out, and I'd seen him in the magazine articles and heard lots of great things about him. He was known as the father of Hapkido in America. And so I began training at his school out in Santa Monica versus the school I trained at in Chicago, because it was much more convenient. I was already flying out to California once per month for 4 to 5 days, and that fit in greatly because I would do my Kung Fu training in the afternoons and my Hapkido training in the evenings with Grandmaster Han. And I remember at the intermediate level, I failed one of my tests at the Hapkido school, and it was a devastating experience because I had flown a friend of mine out with me, and he thought that I should have passed, and it was unfair that I had failed because I had flown so far and spent so much money to get there. But I took it as a sign that I just needed to work harder, and I came back and worked, went back the next month and passed my test. So that was the last test that I failed, and who knows if that'll be the last one that I ever failed. But it was a great learning experience for me. Failing a test is never pleasant, but you can learn so much if you just don't give up. Wow, that's a difficult one. How has martial arts impacted my life? Well, let's just say this. If it weren't for the martial arts, I'd be in jail today. I truly and honestly believe that. The kinds of people that I chose to associate with and hang out with and be around were not great people. I was still a very impressionable person and a bit naive, and so I would get in with the wrong crowd because they were the fun crowd. You know, in school I was the guy that sat in the back of the classroom with these guys, and we became the class clowns and got in lots of trouble and did a lot of things that I regret today. But you know, when I got around those people and did those things, I didn't know any better. But when I got involved in the martial arts and really got serious, which was with Grandmaster Che in 1983, at that point I started to really realize that there was something going on, something more that I had to, a higher standard for myself to live by. And that really made an impact in my life. And so the martial arts has given me tremendous confidence in myself. It's greatly helped me with dealing with anger issues as a child, going through the different families and the divorce issues and things. I was very angry at my parents for that, and getting picked on and teased at school, I was very angry for that as well. But the martial arts helped me to deal with that, and really had done so much for my confidence and my self-esteem. Also physically, I got rid of asthma through my martial arts training. I became stronger than I'd ever been in my life, and leaner and fitter. I was able to ace my ASVAB test to get into the military because of my martial arts training. And in the martial arts, or in the Army, I was able to do very well in the physical side of things and the mental side as well. The mental side has been probably more beneficial than the physical side. So yes, absolutely, it's impacted me in numerous ways. What gives me the most satisfaction as a teacher? Well, it's seeing that spark in somebody's eyes when they finally get it, they finally understand, they finally realize that they're more than what they thought that they were. They could do more than they thought that they could do. Seeing somebody overcome challenges and grow from it. It's always it's a terrible pain for me as a teacher to see somebody drop out and quit when they're so close to really learning something and really changing as an individual. You know, teaching is it's a noble profession, but in the martial arts there are a lot of different types of teachers, and some teachers are a little bit lenient with their student body, and they're afraid to fail a student or afraid to cause friction between a student and themselves because of they might drop out, and if they drop out then they stop paying for lessons, and that's unfortunate. But I've never been afraid of that. So when I get through to a student, and I'm very strict with my students, I'm very hard on them. I'm still very much an old school teacher, but I have evolved quite a bit to bring in some of the new school thoughts and methodologies of teaching. So there's some great things there. As long as you blend those together, I think that it's a perfect marriage of teaching from the old school and new school today to really get those results. And so that's what really turns me on about being a teacher, is when I see that spark in somebody's eyes when they finally get it, and when they overcome a challenge, especially if they fail a test, because I failed a lot of them, and that's it. Well, there is really the answer, and this is the standard answer you're going to hear from a lot of people. There's no such thing as the best martial art. People have claimed to have the best martial art for many years, and probably as long as the martial arts have existed. What you'll find that it's not the martial art, it's the person that makes the art. And so there could when the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, first started back in the, I think it was 1990 or so, or it was early 90s. It was a wonderful testing platform. And what, back in those days, and I encourage you, if you've not done so, to look at some of those, because back in those days they had different arts versus different arts. And so they would have Kenpo karate versus Taekwondo, and they would have sumo wrestling versus Shorin-ryu karate, and different types of things, and then wrestling versus boxing. And at the outset, they would find many different types of martial arts that would have success in the ring. And so a lot of the big guys, you would assume that a 600-pound sumo wrestler was going to be able to take out a 225-pound Kenpo practitioner, Kenpo karate practitioner. And actually what you found was that didn't work, because the Kenpo karate practitioner was so in so much better shape that the big 600-pound sumo wrestler, if it went any further past 60 seconds, he didn't have the wind. And so they would learn that the striking arts were sometimes better than the grappling arts. And then they would go back and forth and say which art was best, and they really couldn't decide on that until one man came in by the name of Hoist Gracie, and he was about 5'9" and 165 pounds, and he came in and totally dominated the art with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so for a long period of time, probably 10 years or more, the thought was that was the ultimate martial art, and they were tapping guys out with every kind of style that was out there. Kickers, punchers, and Taekwondo, karate, kung fu did not matter. These guys were just dominating the scene, until some of these guys that practiced these other martial arts began practicing the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and grappling arts and adding some of that into their arsenal. And then they started to beat the strictly Jiu-Jitsu practitioners. And so they learned that there was no art that was the best art. And so Bruce Lee had it right. Back in the 60s and 70s, he created his art called Jeet Kune Do, which was basically a conglomeration of all the different martial arts. And his philosophy was to train in every type of fighting, from long range to close range, from standard up fighting to ground grappling and punching and kicking and biting and headbutting and everything. And that was how you train to fight. And so that's what they're just coming to realize in this day and age, that there's no such thing as an ultimate martial art. Every martial art is excellent. Every martial art has something to offer, and it's up to the student to make that art what it is, and obviously to add what is specifically your own. So even in the arts, the arts like karate that are, or kung fu systems that are very traditional oriented, there's no such thing as being exactly the same, because every master adds something of himself or herself to that art. So that's the answer to that question. The name Level 10. Well, the school that I came from was, with Grandmaster Che, was called the Oriental Martial Arts College. And the reason they called it the Oriental Martial Arts College was because it was a system that blended many martial arts together. And at the time I didn't know this. I thought that our Taekwondo program was strictly a Taekwondo program, and later I found out that it was much more than that. It had many elements of different types of martial arts. And in fact, I remember the original logo saying Judo, Karate, Kung Fu, Taekwondo, Tai Chi, Jiu-Jitsu, and so, like 8 different things on the logo. And so at that time we didn't know. We just thought that those were taught at different times of the day and different places, and no, that was not the case. They were all taught at the same time. And so even though I was able to earn my black belt in the art of Taekwondo, I had earned my black belt in multiple arts that I would later find out. So when I decided to create Level 10 Martial Arts College and branch out on my own, I was looking for some kind of a name that would really encapsulate what it was that we were trying to accomplish. And I came up with Theros Martial Arts, the Asian Martial Arts Academy, and the Martial Arts College of Martial Arts, and things like this. And at that time, a good friend of mine and mentor in the martial arts named Tom Kalos, who's very well known in the martial arts industry by the instructors and school owners, was talking about Level 10, and he was always, every time I would hear him speak, he was always talking about rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being your worst and 10 being your best, and always try to operate at Level 10. And I thought, that's it. Level 10, because I want to encourage my students to try to work at their very best and to have higher standards for themselves. And so that's where the name came from. A lot of times people misunderstand and think that the Level 10 is about the belt levels and things of that nature. That has nothing to do with it. It's just a coincidence. But level 10 is about being your best and having higher standards for yourself. So having higher standards for your lifestyle, not settling for mediocre when you could have better or do better. So maybe from the type of grades a child gets, level 10 is the best. That's straight A's. And obviously that's not easy to do, but if you set your goal to straight A's and you fall short, you might get some B's, but you certainly aren't going to have D's and F's on your report card. When it comes to work and careers, I encourage people to become supervisors, managers, and business owners, and not just regular employees and things of this nature. As far as their hygiene, taking care of yourself and taking care of your body. Your body's a temple. You're putting the right things into your mind. Hanging out with the right types of people. That's all level 10. It's just an entire lifestyle. So that's where the name came from.